Bartered to a trapper and beaten blind, a Lakota chief took her and gave her sight again. The snow was coming when I found her. Not found, that word is too clean. Stumbled onto her. My horse shied at something half buried in the draw and I near went over his neck, and when I got down to look I thought it was a blanket or a dead dog. It was neither. I had been riding back from the North Fork, alone, the way I always rode by then. My second wife, Painted Wing, had gone to the spirit world 2 winters before, and I had stopped making fires for 2 people. My lodge had grown quiet in a way that took some getting used to, and then took more getting used to, and then I stopped expecting to get used to it, and just let it be what it was. My sons were grown and had their own lodges, their own fires, their own troubles. The council still came to me, still sat across from me with their eyes serious and respectful, and I listened, and I gave what I had to give. But when they left I was alone with the cold and the dark, and that was that. A man learns to make peace with a thing or he breaks under it, and I am not a man who breaks easy. The ride back from the North Fork was 2 days in good weather. I had pushed through because the sky had that iron color it gets before the serious cold sets in, the kind that moves in from the north in one wall and doesn't negotiate, and I wanted to be home before it arrived. That was the only reason I took the draw instead of the high trail. The draw was shorter, and I was reading that sky wrong, and the snow was closer than I thought. Her name I did not know yet. Her face I could not read. She was white, which I saw immediately, and she was breathing, which surprised me more. The cold had been sitting on that draw since before sunup, maybe colder than 30 below, and she had nothing over her but a torn calico dress and 1 boot. The other foot was bare and dark at the toes. Her hair was frozen to the ground. Actual frozen, locked in the ice at the bank of the creek she'd crawled out of or fallen into or been thrown from. I do not know which, even now. I cut her free. That's what I did first, pulled my knife and cut her hair out of the ice rather than try to warm it loose, because we didn't have that kind of time. A man who spends time deliberating when there is nothing to deliberate about is a man who loses things he didn't have to lose, and I have never been that man. I carried her back to the horse. She made a sound when I lifted her, a sound that was not a word and not quite a cry, something between the two, like the sound a person makes when they were braced for one more bad thing and instead got something different. I said to her in Lakota without thinking, the thing you say to a child when it is frightened and you want it to know it is going to be held. I don't know why I said it. She couldn't have understood it. It was what came out. She was light, that struck me how light she was. I have carried deer heavier. I brought her to my lodge. My youngest daughter walks far, was there that evening. She came by most evenings since her husband was out riding with the other young men, a pattern that would continue until the 3rd child tied him closer to home, and she took one look at the woman I carried through the door and had hot broth ready before I had the woman laid out on the sleeping robes. Walks far is practical that way. She gets it from her mother. She did not ask me questions, and I appreciated that. She saw what was needed and she did it. There would be time for questions later, or there wouldn't, and either way the broth needed to be hot. We could not see the face properly at first. The swelling had closed both eyes. The left one was shut hard, sealed shut, the skin around it a color I have seen on bruised plums. The right was worse. Someone had hit her across the bridge of the nose hard enough to drive bone splinters sideways, and the right eye, I am not a man who looks away from hard things, but I looked away from that once, and once only, and then I looked back and I did what could be done. Walks far worked on the frostbitten foot. I cleaned the face as best I could. There were older marks too, under the new damage. Marks that had been made over time, not all at once. The kind of marks that accumulate on a person who has been in the care of someone who considers their hands his right. That kind of damage has a different quality than a fight. A fight leaves marks that are random, some places and not others. These were too deliberate, too practiced. I knew who had done it before I knew her name. There was a trapper who came through twice a year, a big red-bearded man from somewhere east, Canada maybe, who traded with us when it suited him and cheated when he thought he could manage it. I had put him off our land twice in recent years. The elders did not like conflict with the whites, and they were not wrong to be cautious. It was not a time when conflict served us, and the elders had seen enough of what conflict cost to know the shape of it, and so I had been patient. But I had put him off twice, and both times his eyes had that flat shine to them. A man who smiles at you and is calculating something behind the smile. And I had not liked him then, and I did not like him more now. I found out later, much later, from her own mouth, pieced together over weeks as she was able to talk, that her husband had died the previous spring, a homesteader 2 days east who'd been bitten by a rattler and gone fast. Didn't suffer, she said. That was the only mercy in it. She had no family in the territory, no family within reach of the territory, no one she could send word to who could have helped in time. The trapper had come around, red-bearded and reasonable-sounding, offering to take her to the nearest town, a week's ride south where she might have gotten passage east. She had trusted him because she had no better option, and because at that point in her life she was still capable of trusting a man who presented himself as helpful. He had taken that from her along with everything else. He had sold her work to 3 different men along the way south, the last of which was himself, and she had run when an opportunity opened up, a distraction, a moment when the rope was loose, and she had run in the wrong direction, north instead of south, and the cold had come in, and she had made for the creek thinking she could follow it to something, and she had fallen, and she had not gotten up again the way she needed to get up. That was the story. It took about 4 sentences to tell, and a whole life to endure. But that was later. That first night I did not know any of it. I only knew I had a woman in my lodge who was hurt badly, and that Walks Far was watching me from across the fire with those dark, patient eyes of hers that looked too much like her mother's, and that the snow outside had started for real and wasn't stopping. Her name was Clara. I know that because she said it in her sleep twice, the second night, not to anyone, just said it the way people say the things that are most themselves when they've stopped performing. Clara said it like she was reminding herself, like she'd been away from it for a while and was checking that it was still there. The eyes were the thing I worried about most. The foot healed well. Walks Far knew what to do with cold damage, and we kept the woman warm and rotated the heated stones around the sleeping robes, and the toes came back over 2 weeks, painful coming back, but they came. She did not cry when they came back, though it must have been considerable. She pressed her lips together and breathed through it. The cuts on her face closed. The bone in her nose set crooked and would stay that way, but she would breathe through it, and that was what mattered. But the eyes. The left eye opened on its own after about 10 days, slowly, like a door in a house that has been swollen shut, opening in parts. She could see from it, but said it was like looking through river water, everything moving and pale. I said that would pass. I did not know for certain that it would pass, but I had seen eyes like this before, and most of them passed, so I said it would. The right eye I was less sure about. The swelling there was different, deeper, and there was a man in our village, Loud Hawk, who had been a healer of some skill before the drinking took him, and I brought him in on the 3rd day to look at it. He squinted at the eye for a long time without touching it, his breath smelling of what it always smelled of, and then he said something that I will not repeat here because it was not encouraging, but the end of it was that we would have to wait and see. That was all anyone could do, wait and see. I walked him back to his lodge and told him I was grateful, and he waved it off with the gesture of a man who has seen too much to take gratitude seriously anymore, and I watched him go and thought, all right, then we wait. She did not know I was a chief at first. I don't think she understood much about where she was or who I was. She was not stupid. I would learn she was not stupid at all, but she was badly hurt, and in a strange place, and mostly she was sleeping or in that half place between sleep and waking where the mind is trying to heal itself and can't quite let go. I sat near the fire and did the things I always did in the evenings. Worked leather. Sharpened things that needed sharpening. Walks Far came and went. One of my sons stopped by and said something about the horses, and I answered him and he left. The ordinary business of a lodge. Nothing performed for the woman's benefit. This was just what a lodge sounds like, and she was in it. She heard all of it without being able to see it properly and without understanding the language. And I thought later that it must have been like being a child again. Sounds that meant something to everyone else. Patterns and weight and tone that you could feel but couldn't parse, and you were just beginning to learn the shape of them. I spoke some English, not a great deal, enough to trade, enough to argue with government men, enough to say most of what needed saying, but I did not speak it to her at first. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was waiting to see if she would try to speak first. Maybe I was giving her time. Maybe I was giving myself time. A man who has lived alone for 2 years develops habits around speech. You stop wasting it. You let the quiet do more of the work. It was the 4th day. She had gotten herself upright against the robes without help, which was the first time she'd managed that, and she was sitting there with the left eye open to a slit and her hands in her lap and her chin set in a way that told me something about her even before she spoke. The chin of a person who has decided to stop waiting. She said, "I don't know where I am." I said, "My lodge." She was quiet a moment, then she said, "You speak English?" I said, "Some." She said, "Who are you?" I told her my name. In Lakota, the full name stands against the river, and then I gave her the shorter version the English speakers sometimes used, which was just stands. She thought about that. She said it once, trying it out. Stands. Like she was seeing whether it fit in her mouth. Her voice was still raw from whatever she'd gone through, but there was a directness in it that I noticed and filed away. She said, "Why did you bring me here?" I said, "You were dying." She said, "Oh." And that was the whole conversation. She lay back down. I went back to my work. Those early days had a particular quality. I am trying to find the right word for it. Not uncomfortable exactly. Something more like careful. We were both careful. She was careful the way an injured animal is careful, measuring everything, watching me sideways even when she wasn't looking directly. I did not take it personally. She had good reason to be careful. A man who has spent time around frightened things, horses, dogs, children, men after a bad battle, knows the difference between fear of you specifically and fear that has been put into a creature by other people. This was the second kind. I knew it and I worked around it the way you work around it, which is mainly by being consistent and making no sudden moves. I was careful the way I have always been careful with things that could still break, and she could still break, and I knew it. What I noticed over those early weeks is that she did not ask me to send her anywhere. Now that was interesting to me. There were places she could have been taken. There was a settlement 2 days' ride south where white people lived, where she might have found passage to somewhere with more of her own. I would have arranged it if she had asked. It would not have been easy or pleasant for reasons that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the particular kind of man who ran that settlement, but I would have arranged it. But she didn't ask. And I did not offer, because I had learned that when a person does not ask for the door, it is usually because they are not sure yet which side of it they want to be on. You don't push a person through a door they haven't asked for. Walks far liked her. That was a thing. My daughter is not a person who likes easily. She has her mother's quality of seeing people clearly and quickly, and what she sees often does not impress her. She holds herself to a high standard and extends that standard outward to the people around her, and most people do not clear it without considerable time and demonstration. But she would sit with Clara in the afternoons, and they would work out a language together, part English, part Lakota, part the pointing and the demonstrating and the laughing when something got garbled. And I would listen from across the lodge, and there was a sound in it that I had not heard inside my walls in 2 years. That sound, I am aware I keep coming back to sound, but it is the thing I remember most clearly, not images but sounds. The way the lodge sounded when it had 2 people in it instead of 1. The way it sounded when Walk's Far's voice went up because she was explaining something and Clara's went up because she was not understanding it, and then both of them laughed at once. The particular sound of a life that has more than one person in it. The right eye opened on the 16th day. I was there. It was morning, the fire low, and Clara was sitting up. She was always sitting up by then. It had been over a week since she'd spent time lying down voluntarily. She was restless in the particular way of a person whose body is healed enough to make the stillness feel wrong. And she went still all at once. The way a person goes still when something unexpected is happening to them, and they do not want to scare it off. I said, "What?" She said, "It's," and then she didn't finish the sentence. She just turned her head slowly like she was testing it, like she was following something across the air in front of her with her eyes, and I watched her right eye move. Just move. Track something. Track my face. I said, "How much?" She said, "I can see you." And her voice did a thing on those 4 words that she probably didn't intend and might not have known it did. A person trying not to cry sounds a particular way, holds the sound back in a particular part of the throat, and she sounded that way exactly. I did not say anything. I am not a man who fills silences with words just because the silence is heavy. I just looked at her and let her look back. She looked at me for a long time. I don't know what she saw. I know what I saw, which was a woman getting something back that had been taken from her, and I know what that looks like, and I was glad to see it. She said, "It's blurry." I said, "It'll clear." She said, "You said that about the left one too." I said I was right. And that was almost a smile. Not quite, but almost. The muscles around her mouth moved in that direction and then thought better of it, but I saw it. I filed that away too. Over the weeks that followed, I watched her become herself. That is the best way I can describe it. She had come to me as a woman scraped down to almost nothing, and she came back to herself the way a river comes back after drought, not all at once, not evenly, but you could see it happening if you watched. She began to take interest in things. The work of the lodge. Horses, she had a good instinct with horses. And the first time I let her help with one of the younger ones, she was patient with it in a way that told me she'd been around them before. Not as a person who was taught to be patient, but as a person who understood them naturally. She asked Walk's Far questions about everything, insatiable the way curious people are, wanting to know the word for this object, the purpose of that tool, the name of the plant that Walk's Far used on a cut that had gone wrong. Her Lakota came faster than I expected. She had a good ear and she worked at it deliberately, repeating words to herself in the evenings, mouthing them quietly when she thought no one was watching. She began to help, not because anyone asked her to. She just started doing things, seeing what needed doing and doing it. There was a pragmatism to her that reminded me, more than once, of women I had respected in my own life. Women who assess a situation and work the problem without drama. She was not soft. Whatever had been soft in her, life had been taking it off for years, and maybe that was a loss and maybe it was a refinement, but what remained was something real and durable. She asked me things sometimes in the evenings, questions about my life, my history, my people. She asked carefully, not prying, more like a person who is genuinely curious and is also aware that curiosity can be rude if you let it run without manners. I answered what seemed worth answering and I let the rest go by without comment, and she understood when I did that, which was another thing I noticed about her. She read people well. She had learned that from necessity, I imagine, the same way people learn to read weather when they've been caught out in it enough times. She asked me once about Painted Wing. It was not a question I had been asked in a long time. People around me had stopped asking because they could see I didn't want it touched, and she didn't know that history, or maybe she did know it from Walk's Far and thought it needed touching anyway. She asked quietly just, "Your wife? Walk's Far said she passed 2 winters ago." I said yes. She waited. When I didn't say anything else, she didn't push. She said, "I'm sorry." I said she was a good woman. Clara said, "I believe it." I looked at her when she said that. She wasn't performing sympathy, wasn't leaning forward with a tilted head the way people do when they want you to see them caring. She was just saying a true thing plainly, the way she said most things. I believe it, as if it were the most natural conclusion in the world that a man like me would have a good woman beside him, as if it were obvious. As if my having been loved well by a good woman was not a surprise or a fluke, but just a thing that made sense, given what she could see of me. I had not had anyone say something like that to me in a long time. The council respected me. My sons were loyal to me. But respect is one thing, and this was a different thing. This just quiet, easy certainty that my life had contained something worth containing, and I felt it go down into me the way a drink of cold water goes down on a hot day, and I sat with it, and I did not say anything else, and neither did she. Spring came. The days stretched out. The ice on the creek behind the village let go in pieces over the course of a week, loud cracking sounds in the night that used to wake Painted Wing and me both, and then she'd tuck herself back against my side, and I'd put my arm around her, and we'd lie there listening to the ice go. I lay there listening to the ice go alone, the way I had the last 2 springs, and it was the same as it always was, except that I was aware of the sound from Clara's side of the lodge, the small sounds of a sleeping person, and it was different from being alone even though she was sleeping and I was awake. I have thought about that a great deal since, how a life can have a sound to it even when nothing is being said, how presence is a thing of its own. There is a difference between a lodge that is empty and a lodge that is merely quiet, and it took me 2 years without Painted Wing to fully understand that difference, and it took Clara being there, just being there, breathing, taking up her portion of the dark, to understand it in the other direction. The trapper came back in late spring. I knew he would. Men like that have no sense of what they have done being finished. In their understanding, the world owes them what they have decided they are owed, and the world's failure to deliver is always a temporary condition, a misunderstanding to be corrected. He came to the edge of our land with 2 other men, white, armed in the careless way of men who think their weapons make them something they are not, and he sent a runner, his own crow man, hired on somewhere, with a message that said he had come to collect what was his. I sat with that message for half a day. My sons came to me. The younger men in the village came to me, some of them with fire in their eyes that I understood and could not entirely disagree with. There was talk of what should be done, and the talk was not peaceful. I let it run its course the way I let most talk run its course. A man who cuts off talk too early just pushes it underground, where it grows in the dark and becomes something worse. And then I said what I thought, and what I thought was that this needed to be handled in a way that did not bring the soldiers down on us. We had families here. We had children and old people and horses and everything we had built and kept. It was not a year for a fight that gave the government men an excuse. I had seen what those excuses led to. Clara heard some of it. Not the council, she was not there for that, but she heard me come back to the lodge, and she read my face, and she said, "He came for me." I said, "He is outside our boundary." She said, "What will you do?" I said, "Go talk to him." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "He'll lie. He'll say I was his wife. He'll say I stole from him, ran from him. He has a piece of paper somewhere, he told me once, that he said was proof of a debt I owed him for passage and provisions." She said this without drama, just laying out the facts of the situation. He showed it to other men along the way. It worked. I said, "Paper can say many things." She said, "What if they believe him?" I looked at her. Her eyes were both fully open and clear by then. That river water quality had long since passed, and they were a particular shade that I had been aware of for some weeks without having allowed myself to think about it directly, the color of water over pale stone in early morning. Both of them fully seeing, fully awake, looking at me. I said, "They will not take you from here." I said it the way I have always said the things I mean, absolutely, flat and plain and without performance. It is the only way I know how to say them. Some men dress their certainties up, put fine clothes on their convictions to make them more impressive. I find the plain thing is always more convincing to anyone worth convincing. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "You sound sure." I said, "I am sure." She held my eyes a moment longer and then she nodded once, the nod of a person who has decided to let the weight down, and I saw something leave her shoulders, some held-up thing going slack, and she sat back and said, "All right." I went out and I dealt with the trapper. I will not spend long on this part because it was not the important part of that day, whatever it felt like at the time. He blustered. His men tried to look hard. I was not alone. I had brought 6 men with me, not because I needed 6 men for 3, but because I wanted the trapper to see that I was not a man who stood at the end of his string. I told him in my plainest English that the woman had sought shelter in my village after his treatment of her, and that she was a free person who had made her own choice about where to be, and that if he tried to come onto our land, he would not leave it the same way he came in. I said it without raising my voice. I did not need to raise my voice. He tried one more thing, which was the piece of paper Clara had mentioned, which he produced from inside his coat and held up as if the sight of it would change what I had just said. I looked at it. I said, "I see a paper." He said, "It proves she owes me." I said, "Then take it to a judge in a town." He said something then that I will not repeat. I let it sit in the air for 3 seconds, which is long enough for a man to hear what he just said and know what it reveals about him. Then I said, "Go." He went. His crow man, who had more sense than his employer, gave me a look on the way past that said, plainly, that he was sorry for the errand he'd been sent on. I acknowledged it with a tilt of my head and let him go. The crow man was doing work for wages, which is not the same as being what the trapper was, and I saw no reason to make him pay for someone else's character. When I came back to the lodge, Clara was sitting outside the door in the afternoon sun with a piece of leather she'd been working on, and all in her hand, her head bent to the work. She heard me coming and looked up. I said, "He's gone." She put the awl down in her lap. She looked at me for a moment, not a short moment, with something in her face that I couldn't immediately name and then could. Relief, yes, but under that, or alongside it, something else. Something that was taking its time to form itself into words, something that had been sitting in her longer than today, longer than the trapper's arrival. She said, "Come sit." I sat. The sun was long and warm on the south face of the lodge, and she was warm from it, and I sat beside her on the log there, and we didn't say anything for a while. She picked up her work again. I watched the village go about its afternoon business. The dogs and the children and the smoke coming up thin and white in the still air, the ordinary beautiful business of a life being lived. She said, "I want to stay here." I didn't say anything. She said, "I don't have anywhere to go that's better than here, but that's not the only reason." She was looking at her work when she said the first part. She looked up at me when she said the second. "I want to stay because of you." I held her eyes. She said, "I have watched you for months. I've watched how you are with people, your sons. That young man who came to you about the horses and was embarrassed about asking, and you found a way to let him keep his dignity while you helped him. I've watched how you are when the counsel is difficult, and you stay patient when patience is the harder choice. I've watched how you carry the things you carry, and I've watched you do it without making anyone else carry them with you. I know what kind of man that is." I said, "Clara." She said, "Let me finish," so I let her finish. She said, "I was bartered like a mule. A man decided what I was worth and sold me on that number, and that was supposed to be that. I have spent a long time, longer than these months here, longer than the trapper, longer than I want to say. I have spent a long time in the company of men who looked at me and saw something to be used or something to be managed or something to be set aside, and none of it was the same as being seen. You looked at me when I couldn't even look back, and you saw a person who needed help and you helped, And then you looked again and you kept looking and I think, she paused. She said more quietly, I think you saw me, the actual me, and I don't take that lightly. The sun was in her hair. She had a streak of pale now through the left side where the frozen section had grown back in, and in the sun it was almost silver, and it would stay that way the rest of her life. I looked at it and I looked at her, and I did not say anything yet. She said, tell me to go and I'll go. I won't hold it against you and I won't fall apart. I know how to go, but I don't want to go. I am not a young man, and I have not been for some time. I have stood at the edge of battles and felt my chest go tight and then go calm. That particular moment when the body stops being afraid, because being afraid has become a luxury. I have delivered news that broke people, and I have received news that broke me. I know what it is to hold a thing steady when everything around it is moving. But I will tell you that sitting on that log in the afternoon sun with this woman looking at me out of those clear, healed eyes, waiting for me to say a true thing, was one of the harder moments of my recent life. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I had been so long in the habit of not needing to say it that the words felt large in my throat, unfamiliar, like a language I knew but hadn't spoken in years. I put my hand over hers. Her hand was warm and rough from the work she'd taken on, and it was small in my hand, and she turned it over and she held mine back. Her grip was not hesitant. I said, I don't want you to go either. She let out a breath. Not a cry, just a breath. The breath of a person who has been holding something for a long time and can finally put it down. She turned back to look at the village, the children, the smoke, the ordinary afternoon, and she kept hold of my hand and I kept hold of hers. We sat there until the light went long. Walks Far came home at sundown and saw us sitting there and said nothing, but her face when she came past us through the door did a thing that only Painted Wings' daughter can do with her face, a thing she probably learned from watching her mother and probably doesn't know she does. It was a look that said, good, just that, good, and she went inside. I have thought since about what it means to be seen, not performed at, not evaluated, not managed, seen. Walks Far saw her mother in me for a long time and I was grateful for it. My sons saw the chief, and I was grateful for that too in its way. It is a thing worth being for men like mine who need it. But this woman had come to my lodge with nothing and healed here and looked at me with clear eyes and said, I see you. Not the chief. Not the widower. Not the elder with the authority and the grief and the quiet lodge. You, the man you actually are. And something about having that said plainly, with no performance and no asking for anything back, was the thing I did not know I was still carrying until she set it down. We were married in the summer. The ceremony was ours. She wanted to do it our way, not some half-translation for her benefit, and I gave her the words in Lakota beforehand and she learned them and she said them on the day. She said them correctly. She had been practicing for weeks. I found out later, asking Walks Far to correct her pronunciation until Walks Far said it was good enough, and then asking her to correct it more. That is the kind of woman she is. My sons were there and their wives. Walks Far was there, and she wept in that particular way of hers that she would be furious to have me mention, silently, looking at the ground, her jaw set hard against it. Old men from the council sat in the good shade and watched with expressions that said they were pleased but were too old to show it plainly. There was food and there was music and the evening went long, the way evenings go when people are glad. That was 12 years ago. She is asleep in our lodge right now. I can hear her breathing from where I am sitting. The fire is low. I keep it lower than she likes. She always says I was born cold, which is funny to both of us for reasons that go back to that first winter. And she has the heavy robes pulled up, and the only thing visible is the top of her head and that streak of silver, which is wider now and has friends along both sides. And it is still, in the morning light, the same color it was the first time I noticed it. My eyes are not what they were. I can still see what I need to see. But I spend more time now sitting with the fire, thinking through things, and she sits with me sometimes and sometimes I sit alone, and both of those are good. That is the thing I did not expect, that a person can become part of your solitude rather than the interruption of it. That quiet can be shared without becoming something else. She asked me once, this was a few years in, she asked me if I ever thought about what would have happened if my horse hadn't shied at the draw that day, if I'd taken a different route back from the North Fork, if the weather had come in 2 hours earlier and I'd sheltered somewhere short of that place. She asked it genuinely, not to make a point, just the way she sometimes picks at the threads of things, turns them over, looks at the other side. I said I try not to think about things that didn't happen. She said, I know. I'm just saying that it's strange how close things come to not being. I said, everything is close to not being. That's what makes a thing worth having. She looked at me when I said that looking at me she still does, full attention, no reservation in it, and she said, that is a wise thing to say. I said, I have my moments. And she laughed. And that sound is still the best sound in my lodge, better than the fire, better than the creek in spring, better than anything I have found in 60-some years of being alive in this world. She laughs the way she does everything whole, without holding back. A complete thing. You can hear in it that she did not always laugh that way and has chosen to again, made the choice and kept making it, the way any real thing is a choice made more than once. I have been a chief, a husband, a father, a warrior. I have made decisions that other men's lives turned on, and I have lived with the weight of that, and I will go on living with it. I have buried people I loved, and I have buried the younger version of myself, and there is a part of a man that never stops carrying those things, even when he has set them aside as well as a man can. That is just the shape of a life, I think. You carry what you carry, and you find out what you are by what you choose to put down and what you choose to keep. But I am not the man I was the winter she came. Something changed. Something that had been going quietly cold in me since Painted Wing came back. Not the same thing. You cannot go back to the same thing, and it would dishonor both women to pretend otherwise. But something real and alive and warm, which is not nothing. It is, in fact, considerable. She did that. She walked into my lodge with 2 black eyes and a frozen foot, and no language that meant anything in these plains, and she did that, just by being who she is, by surviving and then recovering and then staying, by looking at me clearly and saying what she saw and choosing to be here. The fire needs tending, I will tend it. Outside, the morning is coming on, and the light on the snow is the particular pale gold of early winter, the clean kind that comes before the serious cold, and the horses are moving in the south corral, and in a little while she will wake up and the day will begin. I am 63 years old, and my knees are bad, and I have more past than future. I know what I am and what I am not, what I did well and what I carry the weight of, and I have mostly made my peace with the whole inventory of it. I have been lucky in my life and unlucky in it, and more often than not I could not have told you which was which while it was happening. But I know this, there is a woman asleep in my lodge. She chose this place. She chose me, not because she had no other option, she had other options. I would have made sure of it, but because she looked at what I was and decided it was worth staying for. A good woman with her own strength and her own will and her own hard history, looked at everything she could see of me and said, yes, this. That is not a small thing. It is enough, it is more than enough. It is everything.